סיפור זה מוקרא במסגרת פרויקט פנפיקים לנובי 2024 של קבוצת הפייסבוק ספרים. כל הזכויות שמורות ליוצרות וליוצרי המקור. הקראה. Yield not to Calamity. Introduction. Martyrum. Jeremy Pitt boarded the Cinco Llagas along with other runaway slaves, following Captain Blood's plan. During the takeover, only sheer willpower kept him going. But once the anchor was raised and the sails were filled with blessed wind, he finally collapsed. Blood ordered to carry him to the captain's cabin, and no one dared to argue, assuming the doctor knew best. Wolverston did the lifting and helped undress the navigator, hissing at the sight of his mangled back. Poor soul. Focus on him, Peter. I'll handle the rest of the wounded. None are as bad as him. The giant cannoneer shook his head. Holler if you need any help. With that, he headed back to the deck, praying that no infection had set in that ugly mess. During his own service, the one-eyed sailor saw even small scratches turn into life-threatening, madness-inducing sources of agony. Luckily, the captain of this crew was known for his skills in saving lives, and judging by the look on his face, the Irishman was about to fight for his navigator as bravely as he'd just fought the Spaniards. Chapter 1. Oremus. Peter Blood, the captain of the Cinco Llagas, sat in the cabin of his newly acquired vessel. He took in the impressive riches that became his when he and his men took over the ship, gaining their freedom through an act of impressive courage and sheer desperation. Don Diego, the previous master and commander of Cinco Llagas, led a life of a Spanish pirate and saw no reason to deny himself a few earthly pleasures, proof that the Spanish church was right about God being on his side, at least for a while. However, eventually he fell short of the grace of God, and all those unlawful gains Don Diego had accumulated suddenly found themselves a new owner, who already planned to put them to a good use. Captain Blood was pleased to find expensive spirits in the booty, including a bottle of French cognac and a flask of absinthe. Both drinks were known to awaken different kinds of magic in a man's soul. One would make a person feel like a king, while the other would open their mind to the world of fairies and spirits. Being Irish, Blood didn't let the priests completely wipe the old belief from his heart, and, in a way, he wished he had a way to call upon the small folk and their precious luck. There was also a fine collection of weapons, stone knives taken from Central America, lavishly ornate steel daggers that must have been commissioned by people in positions of power, and some silver blades, decorative and lethal at the same time. Peter traced each edge with his fingers, then picked out the sharpest ones. He then opened the cognac and poured it over the chosen tools, feeling a bit like a pagan priest making an offering of wine as a part of a prayer. This is my blood, and with it God makes his new agreement with me, also the communion went. There were fine fabrics too, silk scarves and handkerchiefs, some emitting the smell of perfumes and incense. Fine but sharp. Blood wasn't a stranger to some of the more exotic carnal pleasures people sought. During his time in the Navy, he learned a lot from those semi-hidden rooms in various taverns, and even had to provide treatment in deal with the aftermath of certain boudoir games gone too far. Yes, the scarves will do nicely. Some could be repurposed as material for new shirts, but also used as a source for fine threads. He could wear them to prove his status as a free and successful buccaneer, but at least 2 of them would be sacrificed by being torn into bandages for the glory of the same God the knives were about to serve. A cough from the direction of his bedroom interrupted his daydreaming abruptly. To quote Virgil, his favorite poet, "Persevere and persevere yourselves for better circumstances," because with all the finery he now possessed, Peter Blood still found himself wanting. Specifically, he was longing for the company of one Jeremy Pitt, a loyal old friend whom Peter could never deny. Jeremy was someone Peter admired from afar, but never dared to approach intimately during better days, and paid for it dearly. It was Pitt that got Peter involved in treating Lord Gildoy, and consequently arrested and enslaved. He was also the reason the younger man's aunts didn't assist him in receiving proper legal defence in that farce of a trial, which almost ended with both men being hanged. But in the captain's mind, the chant that played was Facut ardeat cor meum, Ina mando Christum Deum, ut sibi complaceam. But instead of the true divine, like so many stolen times before, the name on his lips was Jeremy Pitt. Chapter 2. Chiedere. The man on the bed has been through hell. His fair skin was scorched by the sun, his golden hair grew long and greasy during the time in captivity, and the temple of his body was assaulted by a jailer's whip. And now a heretic, a soul who wished sacrilege upon him, was meant to restore him. It was just one of those jokes fate loved to play upon blood. Arabella, Jeremy. Well, hopefully this one won't sneer at him after saving his life. So, after laughing at himself bitterly, a habit of his, as of late, the doctor-turned-pirate got to work. First of all, Peter had to make sure Jeremy wouldn't move during the treatment. So he let the younger man take a sip of absinthe, letting the wormwood potion soothe his mind. Then he proceeded to tie Jeremy's hands and feet to bedposts, using the silk scarves. Another moment of irony, as a sexual fantasy often discussed but never realized, that came true in a terribly twisted way. But now that the patient was secure, he could proceed with the treatment. He cleaned the dry blood and sweat with water mixed with some wine, and felt relieved as the exposed skin showed no sign of infection. During this part, Jeremy actually sighed in delight. It was so sticky, he complained, his voice unsteady from exhaustion, pain, and alcohol. Could you do it again? Peter obeyed, and barely restrained himself from planting a kiss on his patient's undamaged shoulder. No, not like this. Not until their position in the screw has been sufficiently secured, and the crew will take no offence in them showing such tendencies. Then he proceeded to stitching the wounds, trying to work quickly but also cause as little discomfort as possible. Under his hands, Pitt twitched occasionally, but luckily the scarves were of good quality and held him in place. However, none of those movements tore at his heart as much as the moan he heard from the blonde navigator. I'm so sorry, but please, we can't leave it like this. Sorry, Peter, came the muffled reply. Would you like more absinthe? No. A short, terse reply. Blood kept working for what seemed like hours. The moans were more frequent as the drink's influence wore off, but he could see how flushed Jeremy's shoulders and neck became with the strain. Finally, he took a step back to look at his handiwork and cursed himself for not being better, quicker. The crude stitches would surely leave prominent scars, a proof of how useless all his medical education was if he couldn't maintain the beauty entrusted to him by fate. Finally, Peter untied the scarves and rubbed the chafed skin to restore circulation. Let me help you sit up. I'll just apply some bandages now and you can rest. Jeremy turned even redder as he was carefully lifted into a position that exposed his front, along with a tinted, wet spot on his drawers. The moans and the flush suddenly became less a sign of suffering and more a proof of approval for his care. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Pitt scrambled for words. Blood placed one finger on his lips to shush him, then reached down under the rough linen cloth for the thick, pulsing prize. Jeremy often expressed his desire to become a patient of his, and after all these months of hiding the slightest signs of affection, a reaction like this was expected. It is my duty as a doctor to provide relief for all that ails my patients, he whispered. May I? Yes. Chapter 3. Debitus. There was so much said in that single spoken word. For both of them, it was absolution. Peter felt blessed with permission to serve in the temple of Pit, allowed to perform his rites of care deeper than ever. And Jeremy allowed his sun-kissed skin, the fiery sensation of his wounds, to be washed away by the true, steady light of the good doctor. Blood's hands weren't as rough as his fellow slaves, due to his medical duties, and they felt much better than anything Pitt remembered. Warm, just strong enough, moving from the base to the tip, playing with the slit and sliding down again. The blonde leaned against his benefactor's body and let him gently touch his chest and collarbone, to drag more sounds out. The dull ache in his back was almost forgotten, replaced with the bliss of being taken care of, the talented touch of another man who knew exactly how the human body functioned. Even if they hear something, you can always say it's because of the pain and absinthe. Soft breath tickled his ear, poured sweetest words into his mind. The hand in his drawers sped up, closed just a bit tighter around his want, till Jeremy cried out softly and added a gift of seed and tears of relief to his offering of blood and sweat. Peter kept stroking him until he came down from the bliss, then proceeded to wrap his wounds. Jeremy just sat there with a stunned expression and let him work. "You're not angry?" he finally asked. "I hope you're not," a question returned. And maybe it was the remains of absinthe or the relief, but Jeremy suddenly felt like confessing. "You know, I've felt this way since the day my aunts told me you're a doctor. To have such power over life and death, to be able to do such things. You'll never believe the things I've imagined you doing once we got back with each other." Blood stood up from the bed, filled a glass with cognac and returned to Jeremy's side. "First, you drink this and sleep. You need to rest and recover. Then, after the stitches are healed and removed, you'll confess all your sins to me, especially my favorite ones." And each sip was shared communion, on the way to a shared belief in each other. Afterward, stetit puella. Arabella knew that if anyone wanted the truth about Peter Blood, the best source of information was Jeremy Pitt, his self-appointed storyteller. So, one day, while Blood himself was discussing something about Labuschagne and Lord Wade, she cornered the navigator down and asked to clarify some of the rumours about their mutual acquaintance, so to speak. She wasn't prepared for the answers she got. If anything, anyone who'd seen them would describe Miss Bishop as staring at Pitt like he'd grown a second head. "Really? I thought he was after Mademoiselle d'Ogeron. Surely I'd be the first to know about anyone spending time in his cabin for non-work purposes." And only after both corsairs walked away from the governor's office, Arabella realized what she'd just heard. In her mind, it was her fault for being so judgmental towards Blood, while this young man stood by his side loyally. Also, she'd heard about what life is like on ships during long travels, and honestly, she had much to think about.